Welcome into Words with Wallace. I'm your host, Nick Wallace, coming at you. It's Sunday, January 11th. What's going on, everybody? Coming out of my podcast hibernation. But there's a lot of people asking, is he ever going to come back? Is he still locked in, watching the league? Does he even know what's going on? Yes, I do. I have been locked in. I can't tell you how many times I did up a whole podcast outline just to not have the time to record it. It's been tough, work, holidays, a little bit of travel sprinkled in. But the important thing is that we're back down. We have a great week in the NBA, highlighted by the Trae Young trade to the Washington Wizards. We're going to talk about that in a second. Morant, he's on the block, more available than ever. Is he actually going to get moved before the deadline? Also, more awful news out of Dallas, another Anthony Davis injury. Of course, I got to bring you guys Celtics Corner. It's been a while, right? We got to talk about what are we? We're the 2 seed in the Eastern Conference, tied for the 2 seed with the New York Knicks. It's been an awesome run for the Celtics here the past month or so. So excited to talk about that as well. But yes, a lot of headlines that I missed. Some of the stuff I can live with, right? You don't necessarily need a podcast from me every single week. I'm sure you guys are dialed in on the NBA as well. But one thing I can't tolerate, my lack of respect for the NBA Cup. I mean, I just totally disrespected the Cup this year. That was one of the podcasts I was going to record, so since I didn't say it before, shout out the Knicks. Maybe they'll hang the banner and MSG, who's to say, for winning the NBA Cup. Shout out Tyler Kolek. Had a real moment there for a hot second. The Knicks discovered that they can actually play their bench under new coach Mike Brown. Shout out Christmas Day. Missed that entire slate. Didn't record any podcast on that. I will say that the Knicks and the Cavs and Wolves Nuggets, the first and the last game of the day on Christmas, really carried the slate. It was relatively weak on Christmas Day. Maybe I'm just bitter as somebody who didn't get to see the Celtics on Christmas for the first time in a while, but still much better than the NFL slate that day. Gotta say that. And missed a ton of other news as well, right? Jokic is out for like a month after hyperextending his knee. Giannis is also available, but he's not really available. Of course, I missed the Chris Paul storyline too. That one really killed me. I was excited to dive in on that. Him getting sent home by the Clippers in the middle of a road trip after travel delays when they were just sick of him holding that shitty team accountable. I thought that was very funny, especially now that he hasn't technically been waived and he is available to be traded, but nobody's trading for a washed up Chris Paul, so that really ruined that guy's retirement tour, so I thought that one was entertaining. But yes, so many storylines out there. The NBA, we're at a perfect point in the season where we got the trade deadline coming up, the NBA All-Star Game around the corner. And real quick before we get into the meat and potatoes of this episode, but if you do want to hear me get more in-depth on a bunch of other teams around the NBA, I did actually break my hibernation right before this. I did go on Sean Jones' NBA show. He hit me up, went back on his podcast. He does a great job over there. And we did mid-season superlatives. Great podcast where we hand out a bunch of awards, talk about really all the most interesting teams in the NBA. And we also talk about the Trae Young trade on that podcast as well. So definitely check out Sean Jones NBA if you want something a little bit longer form from me this week. And let's get right into it. So let's dive into the biggest headline of the week, which was the Trae Young trade that sent Trae over to the Washington Wizards. So this is a story that's been developing over the past couple of weeks. And the buzz around the trade market for Trae is that it was basically non-existent, right? All these teams that you might think would be in the market for Trae Young kind of announced that they weren't interested. And really the only team that had any type of buzz throughout this entire process was Washington, that Washington was interested. And then, of course, it came out from Trae's camp that Washington was Trae Young's top destination, which I don't believe. Nobody actually wants to go to Washington. No offense, Wizards fans, but Trae is just trying to get out of Atlanta. He wanted to get this over with, and he wanted to go to a team that would maximize his shot at getting a fat contract extension after his current deal runs up. And so that's the deal that ended up going down. Trae Young was traded to the Washington Wizards, and in return, it was Corey Kispert and CJ McCollum going to the Atlanta Hawks. So just Corey Kispert and CJ McCollum, no draft picks, no pick swaps, nothing like that. Just the expiring contract of CJ McCollum and Kispert, who is a nice little player that many people probably haven't even heard of coming off the bench for Washington the past couple years. He's on a nice little cheap contract here, but that is a remarkably low price for Trae Young, at least on paper. So I wanted to start there. And let's break this down from the Wizards' perspective. And assuming that they don't go out and just give Trae Young a max contract within the next couple of days here, I really like the move for Washington, right? This has been a bottom barrel team for the past several years. They really don't have anybody to even put on the posters. It's like, hey, this is our guy. Alex Sarr, the guy that they took number 2 overall in last year's draft, has been awesome. He's taken a real leap this year. It's really not resulting in any sort of wins for Washington. And Trae Young is a massive name. I mean, if you were in a coma the past couple years, you would never believe that Trae Young was sent for no draft picks and no star players in return. But that's just kind of the way the NBA is shifting. And again, if you are Washington, the opportunity to bring this guy into your building who has something to prove, who's been a star player, who's been a walking double-double with 20 and 10 over the past several years. I mean, he is a very special offensive player, but obviously he's pretty flawed, and the market as a whole soured on a small guard that doesn't play much defense, that has to play a specific style on offense. And it's been widely reported that players don't exactly love playing Trae ball, so to speak, on offense. But again, I really like this move for the Wizards. There's really no harm in going out to get that guy. CJ McCollum was their best guard before this deal. He was the guy that they would go to with the shot clock winding down at the end of a close game, albeit Washington didn't play in many close games. But look, now you have a primary ball handler. You have somebody with something to prove. And I think it's being reported right now that they're probably going to let him play out this year, maybe even play out the player option that he has in place for next year. And then they're going to be pretty patient with the extension. If they do that, I think it's an absolute home run for Washington, taking on no risk to go out and bring Trae Young into the building. I think Trae, as much as I haven't been a defender of him and I understand why teams didn't go out and get him, I do think this price was a little low. I think, again, he is basically a league average offense if you just play his style of ball on his own, which is exceedingly valuable, right? There's such little players that can generate the type of looks at the rim, what he can do, reading the pick and roll, being a lob threat, getting his big men involved, just penetrating the defense at will. And albeit the shooting is a little bit overrated, like you think Trae Young's a knockdown three-point shooter, he's just a high volume three-point shooter that doesn't really have the productivity to back it up. But I haven't seen that much regression in Trae's game since the run in 2021. I think he's more or less the same player. He's only 27 years old. So it is pretty shocking to see him get moved seemingly in the prime of his career. Teams are just much smarter now than what they were before, and they recognize that you're hiding somebody that's smaller than me on defense. He's like 164 pounds. He's always been a pretty awful defender. And again, on offense, you kind of have to play through him because off the ball, Trae Young is not that impactful. So that's kind of the deal for Washington. Again, I think this could unlock a lot of the players on their offense. We'll see what guys like Coulibaly, Keyshawn George, Alex Sarr look like in complementary roles, even Trey Johnson playing a bit more off the ball than what he's used to so far. I think it's a great swing for the Wizards. And I do think that Trae, he had that awesome run to the Eastern Conference Finals. He's a guy that obviously is hyper competitive. He's used to being one of the best players in the league at every level he's been at his entire life. It's kind of good to get that guy when he has something to prove, when he has a chip on his shoulder. Not quite the same effect as like the chip that Luka had on the Lakers, but it is like the same type of concept where I do think Trae is going to really lock in when he does have the opportunity to play for Washington. So let's pivot to the Atlanta side of things because obviously, again, they didn't get all that much for Trae Young, just bringing back CJ McCollum and Corey Kispert. That's basically a nothing burger, right? That's nothing that helps your team in the long term besides maybe Kispert's a rotation piece that they really like. They have other guys with similar skill sets with like Vit Krejci and Luke Kennard who kind of fill that role right about now, but Kispert's still a nice player, so whatever. And McCollum, he is on an expiring contract and he is a pretty decent player himself, but he is on an expiring contract. So this does set up the next move for Atlanta. It does make them much more flexible heading into this trade deadline. If they want to get frisky, if they want to take a shot on a guy like a Giannis or an Anthony Davis, something like that, Atlanta is in the position to do so now. It is pretty brutal for them to just get no draft picks and no long-term assets that help their team. But you do kind of have to blame the previous front office for waiting so long to trade Trae Young. They had turnover in the offseason, so it's hard to blame the group that's in there right about now. But at the same time, it's really hard to predict that a guy who's, again, 27 years old, led your team to an Eastern Conference Finals, that he would lose value that quickly, but he did. And the leverage was lost because the Hawks were 2-8 with Trae Young in the lineup this season. Overall, I think they're like the 9 seed in the Eastern Conference and they're above 500 teams. So you look at that in totality and it's just so obvious to the rest of the league that the Hawks are better without Trae Young that all the leverage was gone and his value was completely zapped. So it is rare that I like the deal so much for Washington, but I also don't want to bash Atlanta too much because I just don't think they had really any other options at this point. They could have just continued playing Trae Young or basically benching him and having him hang there as like a cloud over the team, or they could have just made the move that gives them some flexibility right now. You get Kispert on a cheap contract, and CJ McCollum is an asset that you have going into the deadline. So that's kind of how I feel about the deal in a nutshell. I love it for Washington. I don't particularly like it for Atlanta, but I think they just kind of did what they had to do. And now they can move forward with Jalen Johnson leading that team. Nickeil Alexander-Walker has been an incredible signing for that franchise, being a hub of their offense as well. and excited to see what a healthy Hawks looks like if Kristaps Porzingis can get out there. I do think they could maybe make some noise in the East, but it'll be most interesting to see if they continue to stack upon this deal and make another move to make their team even more competitive before the deadline. The next story I want to talk about is very similar to what we just discussed with Atlanta and Trae Young, because the Memphis Grizzlies, according to Shams Charania, are fielding offers for Ja Morant. They have expressed an openness to trading him before the deadline, and they are prioritizing young players and draft picks. And so I completely agree with this mindset by the Grizzlies front office. Whether they actually get a deal done is a completely different story. On Sean's podcast, when we were giving out the award, the midseason superlative of what team should just blow it up, my choice was the Memphis Grizzlies because I do think they have a ton of young keepers on the roster. No like franchise cornerstones or anything like that, but between the production that they've gotten out of Cedric Howard, Zach Edey, Jalen Wells, even guys like Gigi Jackson who are starting to get more entrenched in the rotation these days, I think that Memphis's front office has proven they have done a fantastic job of drafting, and I don't think this team is making any noise. They're currently outside of the top 10 seeds in the Western Conference right about now, so even if Ja stays healthy and Jaren Jackson's out there, this team has no shot to do anything in the Western Conference playoffs. So yeah, they definitely should look to blow it up. But I would find it hard to believe that Ja Morant's trade market is any better than Trae Young, right? Like if you had asked me a couple of weeks ago before all this started, who would you rather have, Trae Young or Ja Morant? They're both flawed players that don't give you much defensively. Both of their shooting abilities are a little overrated. But at least with Trae, all the concerns you have are only on the court. Ja Morant obviously has a pretty well-documented history of struggles off the court that make him a little less marketable than maybe a Trae Young. I know people still love him in the highlights and whatnot, but Ja really can't shoot. He turns the ball over a ton. He hasn't been an efficient player this year. The athleticism may have regressed, and defensively he's always been a nightmare. And then you layer that in with the off-the-court issues, and I just think you get a player that's really hard to trade. I mean, there's enough teams out there that are guard needy. A few that are actually on the cusp of being contenders that come to mind are like the Timberwolves and the Rockets. Both of those teams could be in need of guards. I say the Timberwolves like definitely are in need of another guard because I think the production that they're getting from, Mike Conley's basically washed at this point. Sorry to Mike. Dante DiVincenzo, I don't always love the minutes that he gives the Timberwolves. And I do think in a perfect world, that team would have a guy that they can give the ball to that allows Anthony Edwards to play off the ball a little bit more. But I don't really think Ja Morant's going to be that guy. The Rockets, if Reed Shepherd doesn't continue to develop, they've kind of had that hole in their guard rotation all year with Fred VanVleet out for the season. But if I'm those teams, I'm not making that bid on Ja Morant. I think that's a crazy swing to take when your team is already proven to be really good. Bringing a guy like Ja into the building is just not something I would go for. Then you have like the next tier of teams that could be in the market for Ja Morant, really just because they're so unpredictable. Like, who knows what the Kings or the Bulls are thinking at any point in time ever. So if they came out of the woodwork to trade for a Ja Morant, that wouldn't shock me. I think the Raptors kind of operate similarly. They're definitely a much better franchise, a much better team than the Kings and the Bulls, but the Raptors seem to think that they're extremely competitive right now and have no problem shelling out a ton of money to a starting five that overall is like maybe slightly above average at best. So maybe they would be in the market for a Ja Morant. I think Kings, Bulls, and Raptors would be my top three teams. And I think the Pelicans, if they traded for Ja Morant, that would just be hilarious. I mean, just the 2019 draft, Ja, Zion coming together, the all expectations draft, the guys that were supposed to, carry American basketball and be like the face of American basketball for the next decade. That has not exactly worked out for those two guys. So that would be very funny if they went to the Pelicans. So to be totally honest with you, I'm not really expecting Ja to get traded. That's kind of like my final take is I don't think it's going to happen. I totally agree with Memphis that they should blow it up if you have the opportunity to trade Jaren Jackson as well while he still has some trade value. I think I would take that. I just think Jaren's a pretty flawed player, not nearly as bad as Ja Morant, but I definitely would look to move on from both those guys. Just kind of turn the team over to your young guys, and then you're really bottoming out at the same time. I think if they were to get rid of those guys, then they would immediately be one of the favorites to have the number one overall pick next year, which is supposed to be a loaded draft. So all that to say, I think Memphis has the right philosophy, but I'd be pretty shocked if any teams besides the Kings or the Bulls or the Raptors are the ones that emerge for Ja Morant. And I'd also be pretty surprised if that trade package looks any different than what we just saw with Trae Young and the Atlanta Hawks. The next team that I want to talk about here is the Dallas Mavericks, because they got more awful injury news related to Anthony Davis on Thursday night. Apparently, he suffered ligament damage in his left hand. The damage could require surgery, and if it does, it would be a multi-month absence. So at that point, you have to imagine if he does need that surgery, he is just going to be shut down for the year. Now, that hasn't been confirmed. He's looking for second opinions. It's not usually a good sign, but I guess there is a chance that he could be okay after a couple of weeks and return to play. Now that we got that news out there, I did want to spend a little bit more time on this because I am just so frustrated by the Dallas Mavericks. I think this team has so much potential, and you see that by the fact that they were in the finals just 2 years ago. They have this cast of role players that I'm really a fan of, and the ascension that we've seen from Cooper Flag in just a couple months makes me really bullish on the Mavericks when they're all healthy. Like, I actually went so far as when I was on Sean's podcast the other day, we were giving out the midseason superlatives. Like I said, I was tasked with coming up with a dark horse contender that could make a deep run in the playoffs out of nowhere. Now, I got pretty cute with this one, right? Because I think once you get outside of like the top 3 or 4 teams that could win it all, it's kind of a crapshoot anyway. We just saw about as miracle of a run as you're going to get with Indiana last year, and I don't think we're ever going to see something like that again. But if we did, I think Dallas has the makeup. I actually picked them as my dark horse team on Thursday night before I knew that Anthony Davis was breaking his hand in the middle of taping that podcast. Because, again, I really like this team. I think if Kyrie comes back in the mix, you get a healthy version of Anthony Davis. You push all those guards that I do kind of like in limited roles, like Brandon Williams, Jaden Hardy, Ryan Nembhard. You ask those guys to run your bench unit. They could be really productive there. They have the length and the size with Flag, Najee Marshall, PJ Washington, Max Christie, guys that are willing on-ball defenders. I think they definitely fit like the meta of this NBA that's driven by depth and youth and defense. I think that they check a lot of those boxes. But I think that this most recent Anthony Davis moves should make up the mind of the front office to go the other way. And a lot of people have been clamoring to trade Anthony Davis all year long. I just didn't really see what the rush was. I was like, let him play a little bit, let him rebuild his trade value. You have this team that was put together to contend before. You might as well see what that looks like with Cooper Flag. And I think now they're just in too far of a hole. And I think this recent injury news is really just kind of puts a fork in them. They're 14-25 right now. They're 3-7 in their last 10 games. They're currently the 12 seed in the Western Conference. So it would take quite the run even just for them to get into the play-in race in the West. And sadly, it looks like they're going to have to move on from Anthony Davis without getting much value at all. I mean, he's played in 20 of 39 potential games for the Mavericks this year. He makes $58 million next year, and then the following year he has a player option for $63 million, which we've already seen through the new CBA how difficult it is to make those type of trades and make that type of investment in guys that make that much money. It just takes up so much of your cap. It really removes flexibility in a lot of other areas. You already have Derek Lively out for this season. There are mixed reports going on that Kyrie might not even come back this year. And at this point, I don't know what the rush is. The Dallas Mavericks do have their pick for this year's draft, and they don't have control of their first round pick the next following years after this. So I do think that it's kind of now or never if they want to kind of rebuild through the draft. And frankly, it's kind of what they need to do at this point. I mean, if you look at Cooper Flag, that's the only good thing that's happened to this team over the past year. He is a franchise cornerstone. He's everything that you want him to be. But besides him on the roster, I don't really know how many young keepers the Mavericks have, right? You look at guys like Derek Lively, maybe you still believe in him. I've soured on Lively quite a bit. I know he's really young and talented, but multiple foot injuries at 7+ feet tall, the odds that those keep reoccurring are really high, so that's not a great sign. Plus, I was never really convinced of Lively as a player when he's not next to Luka Doncic to begin with, so I'm just not that high on Lively, and I think besides that, I don't really know. It's time for the Mavs to just try to bottom out even more than what they already have been doing and just kind of mail it in for this year. Now, if Anthony Davis is not ruled out due to this hand injury, if he doesn't require surgery, I think you basically have to at least try to trade him this year, because at this point, I don't think you're going to get all that much for him, but there are going to be teams that talk themselves into the best case scenario and that ceiling outcome of getting an Anthony Davis. So if you can move on from him, that's great. If you can move on from Kyrie as well, I'd say why not? If you can't move on from either of those two guys and you want to see what it looks like with bringing all three of them back next year, I would just not bring back Anthony Davis. I would just not bring back Kyrie Irving. Try to keep that draft picks nice and low, but you can still move on from guys like PJ Washington and Najee Marshall that would serve roles on other teams, maybe even a Daniel Gafford as well. So it really sucks that I've just done a complete 180 on the Mavericks within the past, 48 hours or so. But that's kind of where we're at. I just think they're in too far of a hole, even though this team had the upside of a really talented playoff team when everybody's healthy, at least in my opinion. I just think the injuries are too much at this point, and it just doesn't make sense for where they're at with the timeline of the team. They're looking at it through more of a long-term lens. They really have no choice. They had a short-term lens when they had Luka, when they had that team that made the finals, and it really just makes the Luka trade look even worse. Despite how awesome Cooper Flag is, despite the fact that if you're a Mavericks fan, you can kind of twist it around to be like, well, yeah, we traded Luka for Anthony Davis and Max Christie, but we also got Cooper Flag out of it. Even if you lay it all out like that, it still doesn't make sense to do the trade because the team was positioned to win last year. It was positioned to win the year before that, and now their timeline is completely thrown out of whack, but at least you have Cooper Flag where now is the time to really lean into the tank, bottom out, and try to rebuild for next year. Now, before I let you guys go, we have to carve out some time for Celtics Corner. So tough loss last night, losing 195 to the San Antonio Spurs. I was super fired up for that game. I mean, if you have season tickets of any sort, I'm not sure there's any team that you'd rather see on the schedule come into town than the San Antonio Spurs, provided that Wemby's in the lineup, which he was. I guess he technically isn't starting. They're still bringing Wemby off the bench, which is really stupid as they try to limit his minutes. But it was a pretty awesome game last night, despite the fact that we lost. There's been a lot of discussion online, and a lot of that stemming from Jaylen Brown's comments post-game surrounding the officiating of the game. A lot of people saying the Celtics basically got hoed on the calls, right? There was a 20-4 free throw advantage in favor of the San Antonio Spurs. So again, the Spurs took 20 free throws last night while we only attempted 4. I didn't love the officiating. I definitely think they missed some calls, and if anything, the whistle went in favor of San Antonio. But to be totally honest with you, I don't think that really swung the game as much as people are kind of leaning into it. And everybody loves Jaylen right now. He spoke out about the officials. He said people need to pull up the clips. He said that the league can fine him if he wants. So everybody's kind of rallying behind Jaylen with how well he's played lately. So I totally get it. I'm not going to shit on Jaylen Brown for those comments, but I do think there were a lot of things that the Celtics could have done differently to maybe swing that game in our favor. It starts with Peyton Pritchard. It was just a really tough time for him to have a 4-point performance. I mean, I love Pritchard. Maybe it was my time at home where I'm spending time with my parents and my mom specifically, who just hates Peyton Pritchard with a burning passion, and maybe that's kind of affecting how I look at him. But I do have to admit that a lot of the times you know what you're going to get from Peyton Pritchard within the first few minutes of the game, and it does seem like he just eats teams like the Toronto Raptors alive, like he did the other day. And the games where we really need him, it's kind of like a coin flip at best if he's actually going to show up. And yesterday was a pretty tough game for him. Jaylen made some of the most ridiculous shots we've seen Jaylen make all year long. It felt like he was like really hunting Wemby. It was kind of like an ego thing. I didn't necessarily agree with the shot selection, but he hit 2 of the most absurd step back threes over Wemby, like complete moonballs. The crowd was loving it, and he made the really difficult shots last night, but he also missed a lot of the easy ones on the game. He didn't shoot that great, and he also had a pretty bad turnover down the stretch when we were trying to tie up the game, which ultimately ended up swinging the matchup. So not blaming Jaylen. He was still pretty good on the game as a whole, but if I had to point out the reasons for the loss, it would definitely be the outside shooting from Jaylen on the wide open attempts, and also the game that we got from Peyton Pritchard. Wemby, in the limited minutes that he had, like he only played 20-something minutes, and for the time that he was in the game, he completely affected everything in the paint, right? The reason we also only had 4 free throw attempts is like, guys, when they did go in the paint, Wemby would affect or block the shot, and we just didn't want to go to the basket that much to begin with because we shoot a lot of threes. And with Wemby in the game, it didn't make things any easier. And also, he just killed us on a couple jumpers late. For the most part, we defended Wemby pretty well. We got cute with Jordan Walsh earlier in the game. Keita did a decent job when he was on him. But if Wemby wants to get to that little fall away shot in the mid-range, he's going to get that shot on basically anybody. Granted, we did make it very easy for him on the final shot that he hit. We just had Baylor Shireman on him straight up. Maybe it was like to avoid like some sort of screen to get him in a different matchup that we didn't want, and so we wanted to like pre-switch that. That's really the only reason I can think of having Shireman on Wembanyama under any circumstance in the first place. But that was the matchup that they got, and Wemby got to his little elbow jumper and ended up killing us down the stretch. The Spurs are a really good team, though. I mean, they're the number 2 seed in the West for a reason. They are a team that I believe in as a true contender with the ascension that we've seen from the rest of the Spurs cast, not just Wembanyama. And when De'Aaron Fox plays that well, they're just a really tough team to beat. So I don't want to spend too much time on last night's game any more than I already have. It was an entertaining game, and it's one that I can honestly live with. And even with that loss, the Celtics are still 7-3 in their last 10 games. They're tied for the 2 seed. They've played like the best team in the conference over the past month. I mean, no team in the Eastern Conference has a better record than the Celtics in their last 10 games right about now. And it shows. I mean, it just seems like everybody's missing guys. The Celtics have been pretty healthy for the most part. And there is a world in which the Celtics actually win the Eastern Conference, as crazy as it sounds. I mean, we've been between the 2 and the 3 seed for the better part of like 4 weeks now. Jaylen Brown is playing at a first-team All-NBA level. I mean, honestly, the MVP race is more open than we've seen in several years now. I mean, you have Shea, who's obviously still the odds-on favorite just because of how good he's been and how great the Thunder are as a team. But you look at guys like Jokic, Luka, Wemby, and Giannis, who are, what, 4 of the 5 best players in the world right about now, and they're all at risk of missing the 65 game threshold. So if that's the case, they are obviously not even able to be considered for MVP. And after Shea, you could make the argument that Jaylen Brown is the next guy. I mean, I think he's right there with Anthony Edwards, Cade Cunningham in the mix. So Jaylen Brown's genuinely been that good, and I think he'd be a very good bet to be first team All-NBA with how the season has gone so far. And it's really kind of begs the question, like, what is the Celtics' next move? Like, it's pretty unbelievable they've been able to make the front court rotation work with how good Cade has been. Garza has really emerged as like a great second option off the bench with how well he shoots the ball. He's kind of turned into a stretch 5. He's unbelievable finishing around the basket. He still has the shortcomings and some defensive matchups he's going to get exposed. But we have 2 real bigs. I feel great about our wing situation with Gonzalez and Walsh and Hauser behind Jaylen Brown. I mean, we're in a great spot there. And Simons has been the obvious trade piece for us all year long. We weren't sure how he was going to fit in, but he settled into his role really nicely. He's had some awesome games over the past stretch. And it's a great luxury, especially with Peyton Pritchard in the starting lineup, to have a guy that can just swing games off the bench with their shooting and scoring. I mean, that's exactly what Simons does. He's more bought in defensively than he ever was with Portland with us. And so I'm not really in a rush to move Simons either. Like, I guess the deal on paper all year long was trading Simons for another big of some sort. But if we're bringing back Jason Tatum at some point this season, in a lot of ways, he's just everything that we're missing. Not only is he our best player when everybody's healthy, right? I mean, Jaylen might have something to say about that with how good he's been this year, but he gives you so much on the defensive end of the court. He gives you so much rebounding that you can get away with him guarding the other team's bigs in a lot of different settings. So I think the Celtics are likely going to hang tight at the deadline. Maybe they make a move around the fringes to get under the apron. Not exactly sure what that would look like for them right about now, but I'm not in a rush to move Simons. I'm not in a rush to do just about anything. I really like the way this Celtics season has gone. I think they're one of the stories of the season when you look at their performance relative to expectation. They're right there with like the Spurs and the Pistons and the Suns in terms of how we've exceeded expectations and how competitive we've been without Tatum. Now, what I really don't like is we've been so good that it really just kind of begs the question, when is Jason Tatum coming back? Is he coming back at all this year? We had a report from Chris Mannix earlier today that he's really pushing to play at some point in February or March. So I do think we're going to see him at some point. And if he does, I think we're a really great team that has the chance to make it all the way to the NBA Finals. I'd still expect whoever comes out the West at that point should be able to take care of business against us. But if you make it to the NBA Finals, you're a sprained ankle away from walking away with that trophy if it's a 2019 situation. So I don't know, man. I just think the Celtics team has been so fun to watch. I don't think there's any immediate moves that we need to make. Even after dropping an ugly one to the Nuggets the other night and dropping another tough one to the Spurs last night, the Celtics are still in a really good spot with how Jaylen Brown's playing. I think we do need to bring Tatum back if we want to have a good shot at winning the East, but it's pretty difficult to argue that we're not already one of the best teams in the conference with the sample size that we have so far in this season. So that's going to do it for this podcast today. Before I let you guys go, I did just want to reinforce this is probably one of the best times in the calendar for the NBA season with the All-Star game around the corner. We got the trade deadline coming up. What I'm thinking for my next couple pods, probably on my next one, I will go through my All-Star selections, picking 12 players from each conference if I were the one actually making the All-Star rosters. Eventually, we're going to have the trade deadline reaction pod. We're also going to have to do a tier ranking at some point. I'm thinking of doing my first tier ranking of the season right after the trade deadline, once all the rosters are basically finalized. I think that'll be perfect to talk about every single team in the NBA, separate the contenders from the next tier, so on and so forth. I think that'll be a lot of fun as well. And of course, we got to bring Sean Jones on as well so he can return the favor. Maybe talk a little bit of Phoenix Suns with him, who knows. So that's what I'm thinking for the next couple of podcasts. Appreciate the support either way. Again, apologies for my podcast hibernation. I'll try to not let it happen again, but if you guys do want to stay up to date on all things Words with Wallace, please follow the show on Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to support the show on social media as well. YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. I'm on all those platforms. And I will talk to you guys next week. Peace.